Tell me a little bit about the forum. What was the impetus for putting it up together, and what is the plan?
Sure. So we started the forum early part of last year. We did a big kickoff event in Rome. We had Vivek Ramaswamy come out for it. We did it with the ID party here in the EU. And a lot of the reason we started it, the other board members are also Trump alumni from the first administration, whether it's Joe Grogan, who is Director of Domestic Policy Council under President Trump, Johnny Stefano, who is counselor at the White House. Because what we needed to do was provide a forum, an outlet for the type of conversation around policies, both good and bad, that were coming out of both sides of the Atlantic. And I think one of the things we saw, because we had worked in the Trump administration, I'd served in the State Department, was that a lot of the bad ideas that were coming out of the progressive left, the AOCs of the world in the U.S., emanate out of the European Union.
Right.
Radical environmentalism.
You see a lot of these types of forums on the left.
Yeah,
we probably couldn't name all of them. There's endless amounts.
I think we do a poor job as populist conservatives of actually engaging populist conservatives in other countries. I mean, look, we all believe in sovereignty. Right. We all believe in national identity. We believe that it's part of the fabric of what makes a strong country, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking and engaging around the world. The Democrats do it because it's part of and the left do it because it's part of their identity, the global citizen of the world. For us, it's about how do we make sure that we are advocating for our own national interests and doing so around the world. And so if we're all going to push back on these encroachments on free speech, whether it's the types of things we're seeing out of the UK and Germany where they can crack down on speech that they deem as hate speech, even if it's just a difference of opinion, whether we're seeing the weaponization of the judicial system that we see in France going after Marine Le Pen, or what we saw in the United States, whether it's the radical environmental policies that are hamstringing countries around their energy security issues, shutting down family farming because of the radical environmental policies, the unchecked migration that we're seeing. The same issues were emanating on both sides of the Atlantic, and we had to provide an outlet for populist conservatives to know who each other were, understand better policies, and also talk about how we can fight back.
I've said that there's sort of an irony to it that in order to combat the encroachment of transnational globalism, it requires an international alliance of anti-globalists,
exactly right.
Which is sort of the paradox.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, because it's funny, I remember our first event too, we had a lot of members of the EU Parliament, they said, it took an American to come here and say, nationalism is okay. Right? Because they kind of, we tend to get a little insular and sometimes dispirited. I mean, when we kicked this off in March of last year, I mean, you had Joe Biden as president, or an Otto Penn or whoever the hell was actually president.
We're starting to learn that, in fact, it wasn't.
Not been Joe Biden as president. You had,
I want to know if there's login list on that Otto Penn, by the way.
Yeah. And so you had the, left-wing leadership across the continent in the European Union. And so people were kind of dispirited. I mean, we knew we had our work cut out for us. You look at the reaction since then. Last June, you had record number of support for conservative parties, record number of decrease in support for the most left-wing parties. You had, in France, what should have been a great resounding victory for conservatives, but you had Macron's party ally with the far left to try to prevent Marine Le Pen's party from gaining any ground in their National Assembly. You had increase in support for conservatives in Germany. You had increased support for conservatives in Italy. And of course, we had the election of President Trump. And so we've now been able to see a lot of the ideas we were talking about now get put into action here. The key thing, of course, is making sure, especially in Europe, they actually honor the word of their citizens. I mean, what we're seeing is, you're seeing in Germany right now, they'll label the AfD an extremist group. They won't cooperate to put them into the government. You'll see,
and I think the report leaked, and it was because they said some things about we want to secure our borders and we don't want George Soros controlling our country, and these were the extremist,
crazy ideas,
ideas that, which again, as you say, differences of opinion,
right, and that's the problem. Right? So we talked, we had a great event this morning with Jason Miller, panel discussion here in Budapest, and a lot of it focused around free speech because that's the first thing they go after. Right? They start trying to encroach on free speech. Then they start trying to go after political parties. Then they start going after political candidates. And it's incredible how the left says they want to protect democracy, only if democracy votes the way they want them to.
Well, this was incredible because, and obviously we just saw the situation in Romania regarding that, but Jason mentioned something at the discussion this morning, the panel discussion, as well as something that I think J.D. Vance sort of touched on when he spoke in Munich, another event I attended a few months ago here in Europe, where there's this idea of these new, so there's the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off between the EU, but there's all these questions about trade deals. Jason mentioned that there is a growing sense that the U.S. is going to want to see real commitments to freedom of speech tied to trade. And this is a radical idea, something that I don't think any president has ever tried before. First Amendment, of course, doesn't exist in European constitutions. You won't find things. I personally was detained at the World Economic Forum for doing this show just a couple of years ago, and just speaking with, out. And so, and I don't get to turn back to the First Amendment and say, oh, well, you can't do this because it doesn't exist. So are you hearing that sense as well about this tie between the First Amendment and these trade deals?
Yeah, no, you're seeing the Trump administration say that if we're going to have a real relationship with Europe, and look, the Trump administration values the relationship with Europe. I think the left likes to say, oh, well, he's deteriorating the relationship. No. He believes in the relationship, it should be so strong, it has to be based upon truth and honesty. And I think that's what J.D. Vance was talking about in his speech at the Munich Security Conference, which is if we're going to have a real dialogue, a real relationship, we have to be honest with each other. We have to have those tough conversations. If we're going to say we're this beacon for democracy and the cradle of civilization and all these things, you got to act that way.
And he kept pointing out that all of these values come from Europe originally.
Exactly.
They were transposed to the United States. It didn't exist as a country.
And so I think President Trump and his team with Marco Rubio and others, Scott Bessent and Jameson Greer, are saying if we have to fundamentally reset the European relationship. And so, yes, it's about trade. It's ridiculous that there's as many Audis being driven in the U.S., but no Fords being driven in Europe, right? Like, we should fix that. But then we also have to fix the fundamentals. We're going to truly have this relationship moving forward and not just talk about it in the rearview mirror. We have to actually have an honest discussion about what Europe is doing to its own citizens. And you're seeing this crackdown on political parties, you're seeing the crackdown on free speech, you're seeing censorship, you're seeing what they're doing with the Digital Markets Act, which is essentially hamstringing U.S. companies that are trying to provide the platforms and the technology to provide for open dialogue in Europe. Europe's now trying to smack them around. So we need to have an administration that says, we're going to reset the dialogue here, we're going to reset the relationship, it's going to be based upon the actual free speech that we talk about, the actual values we talk about. And if we can get that right, we can get the trade right too.
Well, and it all ties together. I mean, there's an obvious connection between the U.S. and Europe. There's obvious reasons to want to have that healthy relationship vis-a-vis so many things. Obviously, the peace deal that which we're certainly hopeful that goes through. We're not very far away from the Ukrainian border right now as we sit. And that's something that Viktor Orban, I think, is obviously not in direct lockstep with the rest of his EU leaders, to say the least, on when it comes to it. But it's also something that is a very salient issue in this part of the world. And so I think listening to these various voices, and that's also something that the forum has done, to come back to the United States and explain, hey, these are real security issues that they have, that goes back to NATO.
Yeah, and I remember when I was in the State Department in 2017, 2018. Donald Trump had just won. It was a sea change in the United States. We had to remind the State Department bureaucrats, the career foreign service officers, that there was going to be a new relationship with Hungary and like-minded leaders around the world who were doing things that were so crazy, they said, like secure their borders. So crazy, like saying like we should actually have Hungarians determine Hungarian outcomes, not just Soros and the rest of them to dump in millions of dollars every year to dictate the outcomes of elections. These were common sense things, and it's amazing. 8 years later, we're the ones who have the movement now. We're the ones who actually have, across the world, the understanding from folks that this isn't some fringe idea. This is just common sense. People want safe streets. They want secure borders. They want good jobs. They want economic freedom. These are the fundamental values we need to be talking about on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think those are the types of issues that we're talking about and bringing a spotlight to at the EU-US Forum.